You know that moment when karma doesn't just knock on the door, it kicks it down with steel-toed boots? Well, buckle up, because what I'm about to tell you will restore your faith in cosmic justice. This is the story of how a 72-year-old grandmother named Eleanor went from being abandoned and heartbroken to becoming a millionaire powerhouse who served her ungrateful family the coldest dish of reality they'd ever tasted. And trust me, what she did when they came crawling back will leave you speechless. But before we dive into this incredible journey of betrayal, redemption, and the sweetest revenge you've ever heard, do me a favor. Smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you never miss stories like this one. These real-life tales of justice need to be heard, and your support helps us bring them to you every single day. Also, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching this from. I love hearing from you all around the world. Now, let's get into it. Eleanor Mitchell had always been the kind of mother who gave everything. I'm talking about the woman who worked double shifts as a nurse for 30 years, who never missed a single one of her son Daniel's basketball games, who saved every penny to help him through college. She was widowed young when Daniel was only 8 years old, and she raised that boy on her own with nothing but grit, determination, and unconditional love. Daniel grew up knowing his mother's sacrifices, or at least Eleanor thought he did. He was a good kid, respectful, hardworking, affectionate. They had Sunday dinners together every week without fail. They talked on the phone almost daily. Eleanor wasn't just his mother, she was his best friend. When Daniel got his first real job as an accountant, Eleanor cried tears of joy. When he bought his first car, she was right there cheering him on. Life wasn't always easy, but they had each other, and that was enough. Then came Veronica. Daniel met Veronica at a corporate networking event when he was 28. Eleanor still remembers the day he brought her home for the first time. Veronica walked in with designer heels clicking against Eleanor's modest linoleum floor, her eyes scanning the small but tidy living room with barely concealed disdain. She had this way of smiling that didn't quite reach her eyes, like she was performing politeness rather than feeling it. Eleanor tried. God knows she tried. She welcomed Veronica with open arms, cooked her favorite meals, asked about her work in marketing, complimented her outfits. But there was always this invisible wall between them, this tension that Eleanor couldn't quite name, but to definitely feel. Veronica had grown up wealthy, the daughter of a real estate mogul, and she made sure everyone knew it through subtle digs and not-so-subtle comparisons. During that first dinner, Veronica actually wrinkled her nose at Eleanor's homemade pot roast, the same pot roast Daniel had been raving about his entire life, and said, "Oh, we don't really eat red meat anymore. Daniel's been on a Mediterranean diet with me. Haven't you, honey?" Daniel, who had literally asked his mom to make that pot roast, just nodded sheepishly and pushed the food around his plate. That should have been Eleanor's first real warning sign. But Eleanor loved her son, and if Daniel loved Veronica, then Eleanor was determined to love her too. When they got engaged after a whirlwind 6-month romance, Eleanor threw them an engagement party at her house, spending money she didn't really have to make it special. Veronica spent the entire evening on her phone, barely acknowledging the effort. When Eleanor gently suggested they might want a longer engagement to really get to know each other, Veronica's smile turned ice cold. "Unlike some people, Eleanor, we don't need years to figure out what we want. When you know, you know." The wedding was Eleanor's next heartbreak. Despite having helped Daniel save for years with the understanding that she'd contribute to his wedding, Veronica's parents took over completely. Eleanor was informed, not asked, informed, that the wedding would be at an exclusive country club with a guest list of 300 people, most of whom Eleanor had never met. When Eleanor offered to help pay for part of it, Veronica's mother actually laughed. "Oh, that's sweet, but we've got this covered. We wouldn't want you to strain yourself financially." Eleanor ended up sitting at a table in the back corner during the reception, surrounded by distant relatives she'd never met, while Veronica's family commanded the spotlight. Daniel was so swept up in the glamour and excitement that he barely spent 10 minutes with his own mother on his wedding day. Eleanor smiled through it all, but that night she went home and cried herself to sleep. After the wedding, things deteriorated rapidly. Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly, then we'll let you know when we're free. Phone calls became texts, which became nothing at all. Eleanor would reach out, suggesting they grab coffee or come over for dinner, and would get responses like, super busy right now, or Veronica's not feeling well, or just silence. What Eleanor didn't know, what she wouldn't find out until years later, was that Veronica was systematically poisoning Daniel against her. Every time Eleanor called, Veronica would sigh dramatically and say things like, "Your mother again? Doesn't she have her own life?" When Eleanor sent birthday cards or small gifts, Veronica would roll her eyes and mutter about boundary issues and codependency. She told Daniel that his mother was manipulative, that her kindness was actually guilt-tripping, that her desire to see him was suffocating. And Daniel, desperate to keep the peace with his new wife, started believing it. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving of that first year of marriage. Eleanor had been planning for weeks, shopping for all of Daniel's favorite dishes, cleaning her little house until it sparkled, setting the table with the good china she'd inherited from her own mother. She'd invited them over at least a dozen times, and Daniel had finally confirmed they'd come. Eleanor woke up at 5 a.m. to start the turkey. She made Daniel's favorite sweet potato casserole, his favorite cranberry sauce, his favorite pumpkin pie. The house smelled like love and tradition and family. She kept checking the clock, her heart full of anticipation. They were supposed to arrive at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock came and went, then 3, then 4. Eleanor called Daniel's phone 5 times. It went straight to voicemail. She texted, nothing. By 6 o'clock, the food was cold, and Eleanor's heart was breaking. She sat alone at her carefully set table and tried not to cry. At 8:30 that night, her phone finally buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Sorry, Mom. Veronica's family had a last-minute thing at their place. Couldn't make it. Happy Thanksgiving." No phone call, no real apology, no acknowledgement that he'd left his mother sitting alone on a holiday, waiting for him for hours. Eleanor stared at that text message for a long time, something fundamental shifting inside her chest. The message was clear. She was no longer a priority. She wasn't even an afterthought. She was an inconvenience. Eleanor tried to tell herself it was just a busy time, that things would get better, that her son would come around. But things didn't get better. They got worse. Much worse. The holidays came and went without Daniel. Eleanor's birthday passed with just a generic text message. No call, no visit, nothing. She'd leave voicemails that went unreturned. She'd send care packages that were never acknowledged. It was like screaming into a void, and with each passing month, Eleanor felt a piece of her heart break off and float away. Then came the grandchildren. Eleanor found out she was a grandmother not from her son, but from a Facebook post. She was scrolling through her feed one evening, still in her nurse's scrubs after a long shift, when she saw it. A photo of Veronica in a hospital bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blue, with Daniel beaming beside her. The caption read, "Welcome to the world, Sebastian Mitchell. Our lives are forever changed. So blessed." Eleanor stared at that photo until her vision blurred with tears. Her grandson. She had a grandson, and she'd found out about his birth the same way hundreds of strangers on the internet had. She called Daniel immediately, her hands shaking so badly she almost couldn't dial. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. She left a message, her voice cracking. "Daniel, honey, I just saw the post. Congratulations. I'm so happy for you both. I'd love to come meet my grandson. Please call me back. I love you." He never called back. Eleanor sent a gift. A beautiful handmade baby blanket that she'd stayed up 3 nights in a row crocheting, along with a card and a savings bond. The gift was never acknowledged. She sent another message asking when she could visit. No response. She tried calling Veronica's number directly. Blocked. 3 months later, Eleanor drove to their house unannounced. It was a Saturday afternoon, and she couldn't take it anymore. She needed to see her grandson. She needed to understand what she'd done wrong. She needed her son back. When Eleanor pulled up to their sprawling 2-story home in an upscale neighborhood, a house that Veronica's parents had bought for them as a wedding gift, her little sedan looked painfully out of place among the luxury SUVs lining the pristine street. She walked up to the front door, her heart hammering, and rang the doorbell. Veronica answered, and the look on her face was pure venom. She didn't even open the door all the way, just stood there blocking the entrance, like Eleanor was a door-to-door salesman. What are you doing here, Eleanor? I came to see my grandson, Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady. I brought some things for the baby, and I just wanted— You can't just show up unannounced. Veronica cut her off, her voice sharp. This is our home, and you don't get to invade our privacy whenever you feel like it. I've been trying to reach Daniel for months, Eleanor said, desperation creeping into her tone. Please, Veronica. I just want to meet Sebastian. I'm his grandmother. Can't I just— Daniel doesn't want to see you right now, Veronica said flatly. You need to respect our boundaries and give us space. But I don't understand what I did wrong. Eleanor's voice broke. Please just tell me what I did and I'll fix it. I'll do anything. The problem is that you can't respect that we have our own lives now, Veronica hissed. You're always calling, always texting, always trying to insert yourself where you're not wanted. Daniel and I have discussed this extensively, and we've decided that we need distance from toxic people. We're building our own family now, and we don't need your drama. The word toxic hit Eleanor like a physical blow. I've never done anything but love my son. That's your version, Veronica interrupted. Daniel sees things differently now. He's finally realized how manipulative and controlling you've been his entire life. We're done with this conversation. Please leave or I'll call the police for trespassing. And with that, Veronica shut the door in Eleanor's face. Eleanor stood there on that perfectly manicured porch, shaking, tears streaming down her face, unable to process what had just happened. The woman had threatened to call the police on her. Her own daughter-in-law had called her toxic and slammed a door between her and her only grandchild. Eleanor somehow made it back to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, sobbing so hard she thought she might be sick. Then she drove home in a daze, her whole world crumbling around her. That was the beginning of 15 years of silence. 15 years of sending birthday cards that were never acknowledged. 15 years of Christmas presents mailed to a son who never said thank you. 15 years of hoping that Daniel would wake up one day and remember the mother who'd sacrificed everything for him. 15 years of crying herself to sleep, wondering what she'd done to deserve this abandonment. Eleanor learned through the grapevine, mutual friends, old neighbors, social media posts she wasn't blocked from, that Daniel and Veronica had 2 more children. 3 grandchildren she'd never met. 3 babies who didn't know she existed. She saw photos of family vacations to Europe, of birthday parties and holidays and soccer games. She watched her son's life unfold from a distance, like a stranger peering through a window. The pain was unbearable. There were days when Eleanor didn't think she could survive it. The loneliness was crushing. She dedicated her entire life to being a mother, and now that identity had been ripped away from her. She felt purposeless, invisible, erased. Her friends tried to help. They told her she needed to move on, to accept that Daniel had made his choice, to build a life that didn't revolve around waiting for a son who clearly wasn't coming back. Eleanor knew they were right, but knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally are 2 very different things. Then, about 5 years into the estrangement, something shifted inside Eleanor. She was sitting alone in her house one evening after another 12-hour nursing shift, eating microwaved soup for dinner, when she looked around at her life and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Anger. Not sadness, not grief, anger. She was angry at Veronica for poisoning her son's mind. She was angry at Daniel for being weak enough to allow it. But most of all, she was angry at herself for shrinking, for becoming a shell of who she used to be, for letting this situation consume her entire existence. Eleanor had always been a fighter. She'd raised a child alone. She'd worked her way through nursing school while juggling a full-time job. She'd survived her husband's death and built a life from nothing. When had she become this passive, sad woman, waiting by the phone for scraps of attention from people who clearly didn't value her? That night, Eleanor made a decision. If Daniel didn't want her in his life, fine. She couldn't control that. But she could control what she did with the life she had left. She was only 62 years old. She had time. She had skills. She had a work ethic that had carried her through worse situations than this. Eleanor had always been good with her hands. During her nursing career, she'd picked up a side hobby of making natural skincare products, soaps, lotions, lip balms, using herbs from her garden and essential oils. She'd give them as gifts to coworkers and friends who always raved about how amazing they were. People constantly told her she should sell them, but Eleanor had never taken it seriously. Now she decided to take it very seriously indeed. Eleanor threw herself into building a business with the same fierce determination she'd once poured into raising her son. She started small, really small. She converted her spare bedroom into a production space, spent her savings on supplies and ingredients, and began making products every evening after her nursing shifts. She was exhausted constantly, running on coffee and spite, but for the first time in years, she felt alive. She called her company Eleanor's Garden and started selling at local farmers markets on weekends. Those first few months were brutal. She'd stand behind her little folding table with her handmade soaps and lotions displayed on thrift store tablecloths, watching people walk past without a second glance. Some days she'd sell $20 worth of product, some days she'd sell nothing at all. But Eleanor didn't quit. Quitting wasn't in her DNA. She learned everything she could about marketing, about social media, about building a brand. She took every penny she made and reinvested it into the business. She experimented with new products, new scents, new packaging. She listened to customer feedback and adjusted her formulas. Slowly, painfully slowly, things started to pick up. A local boutique agreed to carry her products. Then another. Then a small chain of organic grocery stores approached her about wholesale distribution. Eleanor's products were good, really good, and word of mouth started spreading. Her lavender chamomile lotion became a cult favorite. Her tea tree face soap started getting mentioned in local beauty blogs. Orders started coming in faster than she could fill them. After 2 years of grinding, Eleanor made a decision that terrified her. She quit her nursing job to focus on the business full-time. Her friends thought she was crazy. She was giving up a stable salary, health insurance, retirement benefits, all for a soap company that barely paid the bills. But Eleanor had run the numbers obsessively, and she knew that if she didn't take this leap, she'd never know what Eleanor's Garden could become. That leap of faith changed everything. Without the constraints of a nursing schedule, Eleanor could focus entirely on growing the company. She hired her first employee, then her second. She rented a small commercial space to increase production. She started an online store that began shipping products nationwide. She got her products certified organic, which opened up new distribution channels. Within a year of going full-time, Eleanor's Garden was bringing in 6 figures in revenue. But Eleanor didn't stop there. She was hungry now, driven by something deeper than just business success. Every milestone she hit felt like proof that she was worth something, that she had value beyond being Daniel's mother. She expanded her product line. She hired a marketing team. She invested in professional photography and branding. She started attending trade shows and landed contracts with major retailers. By year 7 of running Eleanor's Garden, the company was doing $3 million in annual revenue. Eleanor had gone from a heartbroken, discarded mother to a successful businesswoman employing 30 people. She'd moved the operation into a proper facility with state-of-the-art equipment. She'd been featured in magazines and podcasts. She'd built something real, something that was entirely hers, something that nobody could take away from her. And still, through all of it, she never heard a word from Daniel. Eleanor would be lying if she said she didn't think about him. She thought about him every single day. She wondered about her grandchildren, who would be teenagers now. She wondered if Daniel ever thought about her, if he ever regretted cutting her out of his life. But she'd learned to live with the ache, to function around it like you function around chronic pain that never quite goes away. Then came year 10 of the business, and everything exploded. A celebrity influencer with 20 million followers posted about Eleanor's Rose Hip Face Serum, calling it the fountain of youth in a bottle. The post went viral. Eleanor's website crashed from the traffic. Orders poured in by the thousands. Major beauty retailers that had ignored her for years were suddenly calling, begging to stock her products. Within 6 months, Eleanor's Garden went from a successful small business to a phenomenon. Eleanor had to make quick decisions. She brought in investors to help scale production. She moved into a massive new facility. She hired a CEO to handle day-to-day operations, while she focused on product development and being the face of the brand. By year 12, Eleanor's Garden was valued at $40 million. and Eleanor owned 60% of it. Eleanor Mitchell, the abandoned grandmother who'd been called toxic and manipulative, who'd been shut out of her son's life like yesterday's trash, was now worth nearly $25 million. She bought herself a mansion. Not because she needed one. Eleanor would have been perfectly happy in her modest little house, but because she could. Because after a lifetime of sacrifice and struggle, of being told she wasn't good enough for her daughter-in-law's family, she wanted to prove to herself that she'd made it. The house was a sprawling estate in the most exclusive neighborhood in town, with 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a pool, a tennis court, and grounds that required a full-time gardener. Eleanor moved in on a Saturday. She walked through those enormous empty rooms and felt a complex mixture of pride and loneliness. She'd achieved something remarkable, but she had nobody to share it with. No family to fill these bedrooms, no grandchildren to splash in that pool, just her, alone and a monument to her own success. She posted a single photo on her personal Facebook page, not the business one, but her personal one that she barely used anymore. It was a picture of the mansion's exterior with a simple caption, "New chapter, grateful for all of life's lessons." Eleanor wasn't friends with Daniel on Facebook anymore. He'd unfriended her years ago, but they still had mutual connections. She knew word would spread. Part of her wondered if he'd see it, if he'd care. Mostly, though, she was just documenting her own journey, marking this moment of triumph, even if she was the only one celebrating it. What Eleanor didn't expect was that the very next day, on a Sunday morning while she was still unpacking boxes, her doorbell would ring. She wasn't expecting anyone. The moving company was done. Her few close friends knew she needed time to settle in. When she opened the door, confused about who could possibly be visiting, her heart stopped. Standing on her new porch, looking older but unmistakably familiar, was Daniel. Next to him was Veronica, her expression carefully neutral, and behind them were 3 teenagers who Eleanor had never met but recognized instantly from social media photos, her grandchildren. For a moment, nobody spoke. Eleanor's mind was racing, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. 15 years. 15 years of silence, and now here he was on her doorstep, as if no time had passed at all. Daniel smiled, that same charming smile she remembered from his childhood, and said the words that would change everything. "Hey, Mom. Surprise. We thought we'd come see your new place. Wow, it's incredible. You know, Veronica and I were just talking, and with all this extra room you have now, it would make so much sense for us to move in with you. The kids could have their own rooms, we could save money, and we could finally spend real time together as a family. Isn't that great?" Eleanor stood there, frozen, as the full audacity of what was happening crashed over her like a wave. They hadn't called ahead, hadn't asked permission, hadn't apologized for 15 years of abandonment. They'd just shown up at her mansion and announced they were moving in, as casually as if they were asking to borrow a cup of sugar. Eleanor looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing a familiar face. The laugh lines around his eyes were deeper now. There were streaks of gray in his hair. He'd aged 15 years in what felt like both a lifetime and a single heartbeat. Standing there in his expensive designer polo shirt and khakis, with his perfectly coiffed wife beside him and their 3 beautiful children looking awkward and uncomfortable, Daniel seemed to genuinely believe that his announcement would be met with joy. The silence stretched on. One of the teenagers, a girl who looked about 16 with Daniel's eyes and Veronica's sharp cheekbones, shifted uncomfortably. The youngest, a boy around 13, was staring at his phone. The oldest, another boy who must have been 17 or 18, was looking at Eleanor with something that might have been curiosity. Veronica finally broke the silence, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness. "Eleanor, your home is absolutely stunning. You've done so well for yourself. Daniel and I have been following your business success, and we're just so proud of you. When we saw you bought this beautiful estate, we immediately thought how wonderful it would be for the family to reunite. The kids are getting so expensive, you know, college tuition, cars, activities, and this house has so much space just sitting empty. It's really the perfect solution for everyone." Eleanor felt something inside her shift, like tectonic plates grinding together before an earthquake. For 15 years she'd imagined this moment. She'd fantasized about Daniel showing up at her door, apologizing, begging for forgiveness, telling her it had all been a terrible mistake. In those fantasies, she'd always forgiven him immediately, grateful just to have her son back. But this wasn't her fantasy. This was something else entirely. "Come in," Eleanor heard herself say, her voice eerily calm. She stepped aside, and they filed past her into the grand foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier. She watched them look around, saw Veronica's eyes calculating, saw Daniel's nervous excitement, saw the kid's teenage indifference masking what might have been apprehension. They settled in the formal living room, Daniel and Veronica on one cream-colored sofa, the three kids squeezed onto another, and Eleanor in a chair facing them all, like a queen holding court. The room was so quiet, you could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the corner. "So," Eleanor said, folding her hands in her lap. 15 years. Daniel had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Mom, I know it's been a long time." 15 years, 2 months, and 17 days, Eleanor continued, her voice still unnaturally calm. "Not that I was counting or anything. Tell me, Daniel, do you remember the last time we spoke? Really spoke? Not counting that doorbell conversation where your wife threatened to call the police on me?" Veronica's face flushed slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Eleanor, that was a misunderstanding. We were new parents, stressed, dealing with a lot." "I'm not speaking to you yet," Eleanor said, her eyes never leaving Daniel. "I'm speaking to my son. Daniel, do you remember?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Mom, that was a long time ago. People change. Situations change. We were young and—" "You were 30 years old," Eleanor said. "Not exactly a child. You had a baby, my grandson Sebastian, and you didn't even tell me he was born. I found out on Facebook, like a stranger. Do you have any idea what that felt like?" The oldest boy, who must be Sebastian, looked up from his phone for the first time, his eyes widening slightly. Apparently he hadn't known this part of the story. "Mom, please," Daniel said, shifting uncomfortably. "We didn't come here to rehash the past. We came here to move forward. To be a family again." "To be a family again," Eleanor repeated slowly. "And what prompted this sudden desire for family reunion? Was it when my company hit its first $1 million in revenue? Or was it when I was featured in Forbes? Or maybe it was just yesterday when you saw the mansion." "That's not fair," Veronica interjected, her voice sharp. "Daniel has been wanting to reconnect for years, but he was afraid you'd reject him after how things ended. When he saw you'd done so well, he felt like maybe you'd be in a better place emotionally to welcome us back into your life." Eleanor actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Oh, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful, Veronica. So my son was too afraid to contact me when I was a lonely, heartbroken nurse living in a small house. But now that I'm a millionaire with a mansion, suddenly I'm emotionally stable enough for him to grace me with his presence." "You're twisting everything," Veronica said, her composure cracking slightly. "We're trying to do the right thing here. Families should be together. And honestly, you're not getting any younger, Eleanor. Wouldn't you want your grandchildren around? Wouldn't you want help as you age?" "Help as I age," Eleanor repeated. "You mean like how I helped Daniel his entire life? Put him through college, supported him emotionally and financially until the day you decided I was toxic." The middle child, the daughter, spoke up for the first time, her voice quiet. "Are you really our grandmother?" Eleanor's heart cracked. She looked at this beautiful girl, this stranger who shared her blood, and felt grief wash over her. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." "Why haven't we ever met you before?" the girl asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "That," Eleanor said, looking directly at Veronica and Daniel, "is an excellent question. Would either of you like to answer that?" Daniel ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Eleanor remembered from his childhood when he was anxious. "Mom, it's complicated. There were misunderstandings, communication issues. Your mother is toxic and manipulative," the youngest boy suddenly announced, clearly parroting something he'd heard. "She tried to control Dad's life and didn't respect boundaries." The room went silent. Eleanor felt like she'd been slapped. She saw Veronica and Daniel exchange a horrified look, saw the older two kids elbow their brother. "Is that what you told them?" Eleanor asked quietly, her voice dangerous now. "Is that the story you've been feeding my grandchildren for 15 years? That their grandmother is some kind of monster who deserved to be cut out of their lives?" "We had to explain why they didn't have a grandmother on my side," Daniel said defensively. "We had to tell them something." "You could have told them the truth," Eleanor said, standing up now, energy crackling through her. "You could have told them that their grandmother loved their father more than life itself, that she worked herself to the bone to give him every opportunity, that she never missed a single important moment in his life, until the day he married a woman who decided she wasn't good enough. You could have told them that their grandmother sent birthday cards and Christmas presents for years that were never acknowledged, that she showed up trying to meet her first grandson and was threatened with the police, that she spent 15 years with a broken heart, wondering what she did to deserve being erased from her only child's life." Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now, but her voice never wavered. Sebastian, the oldest, was staring at his parents with a look of dawning horror. The daughter had tears in her own eyes. "But you didn't tell them that, did you?" Eleanor continued. "Because that would have made you look bad. So instead, you made me the villain in your story. You let them grow up thinking their grandmother didn't want them, or worse, that she was someone they needed to be protected from." "Mom, please," Daniel started. "And now," Eleanor cut him off, "now that I'm successful, now that I have money and a big house, suddenly you want to be a family again. Suddenly all those boundaries don't matter. Suddenly I'm not too toxic to live with. How convenient. How absolutely breathtakingly convenient." Veronica stood up, her face hard. "You know what? I told Daniel this was a mistake. You're clearly still bitter and angry, and you're making this all about you, instead of thinking about what's best for your grandchildren. We're trying to give them a relationship with you, and this is how you react? What's best for my grandchildren?" Eleanor's voice rose for the first time. "You kept them from me for 15 years, and now you have the audacity to lecture me about what's best for them. You didn't come here for them, Veronica. You came here for you. You saw an opportunity, a rich woman with a big empty house, and you thought you could waltz in here and take advantage of it. Did you think I was still that sad, desperate woman who would accept any scraps of affection from her son? Did you think I was so lonely and pathetic that I'd let you move your entire family into my home without question? We're family," Daniel said, standing now too. "This is what family does. They help each other." "Family?" Eleanor's laugh was hollow. "You don't get to play the family card, Daniel. You threw that card away 15 years ago. Family doesn't abandon each other. Family doesn't cut each other off without explanation. Family doesn't show up only when there's something to gain." She walked to the window, looking out at the expansive grounds. When she turned back, her face was composed, her voice steady. "Here's what's going to happen," Eleanor said. "You're going to leave my house. All of you. And you're not going to move in. Not now, not ever. This house is mine. I earned it. I built it from nothing while you were off living your perfect life pretending I didn't exist." "You're really going to turn away your own son?" Veronica asked incredulously. "Your own grandchildren?" "I'm not turning anyone away," Eleanor said. "You were never here to turn away. You can't lose something you never had." She walked to the front door and opened it, standing there waiting. For a long moment nobody moved. Then Sebastian, the oldest grandson, stood up. He walked over to Eleanor, and for a heart-stopping moment they locked eyes. This young man who should have known her his whole life, but was instead a complete stranger. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know any of this." Eleanor felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. She reached out and gently touched his cheek, the first time she'd ever touched any of her grandchildren. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault." Then he walked out, and his siblings followed. Veronica went next, her face twisted with rage, hissing under her breath, "You'll regret this." Daniel was the last one standing there, father and son, or what was left of them, facing each other across a chasm 15 years wide. "I'm sorry, Mom," he finally said, and for the first time Eleanor heard genuine emotion in his voice. "I'm so sorry, for all of it. You deserved better." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "I did. Can we?" Daniel's voice cracked. Is there any chance we can start over? Not moving in, I understand that. Try to rebuild? Eleanor looked at her son, this man she'd loved more than anything, and felt the weight of 15 years pressing down on her chest. Maybe, she said finally, someday. But not today. Not like this. If you want a relationship with me, Daniel, you're going to have to earn it. You're going to have to put in the work. You're going to have to prove that I'm more to you than a mansion and a bank account, and you're going to have to start by being honest with your children about who I really am. Daniel nodded, tears running down his face. Okay, I can do that. I will do that. He started to reach for her, maybe for a hug, but Eleanor stepped back. She wasn't ready for that. Might never be ready for that. Goodbye, Daniel, she said. He walked out, and Eleanor closed the door behind him. She stood there in her grand foyer, in her beautiful mansion, completely alone, and let herself fall apart. She slid down the door and sobbed, 15 years of grief pouring out of her all at once. But underneath the grief, there was something else, something new and unfamiliar and powerful. There was pride. She'd stood her ground. She'd respected herself enough to say no. She'd refused to be used. After a lifetime of putting everyone else first, of shrinking herself to make others comfortable, she'd finally put herself first. Eleanor stayed on that floor for a long time. Then she got up, washed her face, and walked through her beautiful home. She'd built this. Not for her son, not for anyone else, but for herself. And that was enough. 2 weeks later, Sebastian showed up alone. No parents, no siblings, just him standing nervously on her porch, with a bouquet of flowers. I'd like to know you, he said. If that's okay. Just you and me, no agenda. I want to hear your stories. Eleanor let him in, and they talked for 4 hours. And the week after that, slowly, carefully, they built something real. 3 months later, the daughter came too. Then, eventually, cautiously, the youngest. They wanted to know their grandmother, the real one, not the villain from their parents' stories. Daniel still called sometimes. They were working on it, slowly, painfully. Eleanor had started seeing a therapist to process everything. There was a long road ahead, and she didn't know where it would lead. But one thing she knew for certain. Eleanor Mitchell had spent 15 years being erased, being dismissed, being treated as if she didn't matter, never again. She'd built an empire from heartbreak. She'd transformed pain into power. And she'd learned the most valuable lesson of her life. That loving yourself enough to say no is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do. But Eleanor was filling it with things that mattered. Her grandchildren's laughter during weekend visits, her friends for dinner parties, her own peace and contentment. She'd survived abandonment. She'd built something extraordinary. And she'd discovered that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well, standing firm, and never letting anyone make you feel small again. That's Eleanor's story. A grandmother who lost everything and built it all back on her own terms. And honestly, she's living her best life now, surrounded by people who choose to be there, not because of what she has, but because of who she is. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible real-life stories of justice, redemption, and people who refuse to be broken. Drop a comment and let me know what you think Eleanor should do next. Should she eventually fully forgive Daniel, or keep him at arm's length? I want to hear your thoughts. And remember, wherever you are in life, whatever you're facing, you have the power to rebuild. You have the power to stand firm. You have the power to say no to people who don't value you, and yes to yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.